You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Well, welcome back, BOOKSTORM Podcast listeners and book lovers. Kristen and I are super excited about who we have with us today. We have the wonderfully talented author, Heather Gudenkauf, and her new novel called The Overnight Guest. Welcome, Heather. Happy to have you at BOOKSTORM.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're very excited to talk about this book. And before we do, I do want to tell a little bit of your history because you have a lot of fans out there, but maybe they don't know your backstory, which I found was very heartfelt and wonderful. So Heather is an Edgar Award nominated, New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of 8 novels. Her novels have been critically acclaimed. They've been published in 20 countries. They have been listed on best lists like 7 thrillers to read this summer by the New York Times, the 10 best thrillers and mysteries by the Washington Post, a best book by NPR, and best book for Beach by Chicago Now. You have had some amazing accomplishments. They're very well deserved. We loved this book. Now, a little bit about Heather. She was born in South Dakota, the youngest of 6 children. At 1 month of age, her family returned to the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota, where her father was employed as a guidance counselor and her mother as a school nurse. Kristen and I both have a very deep love for Indigenous people. We have actually researched them for different purposes, and I was very excited to see this about you. At the age of 3, her family moved to Iowa, where she grew up, and here's something that touched my heart. Heather was born with a profound unilateral hearing loss. There were many evenings when Heather and her dad made a trip to the bus barn to look around the school bus for her hearing aids that she conveniently forgot there. She tended to use books as a retreat, like many of us did as children, with all sorts of hurdles to climb as different childhood experiences. But Heather would forget on this, she would climb into the toy box that her father's students had made at the Rosebud Reservation. She would bring a pillow and a blanket, a flashlight, close the lid with her book, and escape the world around her. That sounds sort of wonderful right there. Heather became a voracious reader, and the seed of becoming a writer was planted. And we're so very glad it was, because you are where you belong. It's a beautiful novel. It's a scary novel. I couldn't read it in the dark. I devoured it in one afternoon and loved it. Heather now lives in Iowa with her family and a very spoiled German short-haired pointer, which Kristen can relate to, named Lolo. In her free time, she enjoys, of course, reading, swimming, and hiking. And Heather, we're super excited to dive down into this book with you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just so excited that you enjoyed it, and thrilled to be here. So thank you.
Well, wonderful. Well, Heather, we'd like to give our listeners a little bit of the story. And so if you'll allow me, without giving away any spoilers, I just thought I would tell the listeners a little bit about what your story, The Overnight Guest, is about. And I'm going to echo Chris's sentiments, because I had to turn a light on and then turn another light on. It was kind of a scary book, but that was the thrill and the fun of it, of course, while you also dealt with some really deep subjects. So in your story, true crime writer Wylie Lark has retreated to an isolated farmhouse so that she could write her new book. But this house has a history. And decades earlier, 2 people were brutally murdered there, and 2 people disappeared, including a teen girl. The suspense in your story just keeps ratcheting up. We have a worsening storm. We have no electricity. We have isolation. But soon, Wylie is very haunted by some of the secrets of her own childhood and upbringing and some of the secrets of this house. As the conditions worsen, she goes out and discovers a small child outside in the snow. She brings the child in. She attempts to get some answers, but soon they realize they are not alone. Now, I'm going to leave it there because anything else would give away too much. Did you want to add anything at all, Heather?
Oh, no, just that you summarized it perfectly. Yes, that isolation, the creepiness of being alone, of thinking you're alone, hopefully sets up a great setting for the reader.
Oh, absolutely. Both internally and externally, which is some of what we're going to dive into. So if we're ready to brave the storm, Chris, why don't you kick us off?
I will. And I'm afraid again. Just with that little description, I'm afraid again. It is really good. I love a good suspense thriller, scary. I always have ever since I was a little girl. And Heather, thank you. It was a lot of fun. It was terrifying, suspicion provoking. Look behind your shoulder while you're reading thrilling novel. But let's talk about evil. The character Wylie says, and I'm going to quote, perpetrators delve into their backgrounds, their upbringing, their psyches, in order to try and comprehend why they commit the terrible acts they do. And I just had to know, in your opinion, as the writer of these characters, was it nature or nurture that pushed them over the brink to evil? The reader could not help but compare these characters to some real life, infamous evil people that we know in the real world.
Right. Yeah. And I think that is always the question, isn't it? It's where does this evil come from? Is it due to an upbringing, their environment? Is it something inborn? And it's so hard to know. So I guess what I find, and I'm one of those people who's pretty obsessed with true crime. So I read all the books, I listen to all the podcasts, and I wonder that too. And that's why I think as readers, as consumers of these true crime stories, we want to know why. We want to come to that conclusion of why people act the way they do. And I think ultimately it's a combination. I really think it's a combination of how experiences that people have, that how they're shaped and formed. And also, is there something, that genetically predispositioned? I don't know about that, but maybe something happened that changes the brain chemistry that, affects somebody in that way. So I really think it's a combination. And that's half the fun, though, if I can say fun in a thriller, is trying to find out why. What is the motive behind the crimes and why people act the way they do?
Now, this was a mystery that the reader had to solve. And there were lots of clues and some bunny trails and some red herrings and all kind of fun stuff. I have to know, as the writer of an evil character, because I'm not going to give any clue as to who this is. Do you write that there's some good in them too? I feel like the best evil character might have one little redeeming quality or something good, or maybe a little piece of hope.
Yeah, and I think so. And, the reader can determine if that's the case in this story, of course. But I think, yeah, no one is all one thing. And I think that people are human. There are, positives and negatives. There are strong characteristics, they're negative. And it's just whichever one wins out, right? And that's what we remember about somebody. But, you hear about, some awful people throughout history and through the news, and that they were a child once, that there were good qualities to that person, but maybe they grew up to do some pretty horrific things. And that's what stands out. That's what people remember. And, no, rightly so. They should be remembered for, the harm they've caused. But also, that thought of where did the path go wrong? What changed from, you hear about, oh, the kid next door, the nice kid next door. What changed in their life and in their journey to make them cross over to do some terrible things?
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating, really, truly.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about another theme that was running throughout your story, and that was this idea of home. And several of your characters experienced a violation of that concept and even noted how important home was. Why is the idea of a home or your home so important to our overall sense of security? And I was wondering if you thought that home was a place, is it a person, or is it a mindset?
Yeah, all of those, all of the above. And it's interesting. I wrote The Overnight Guest during the pandemic when most of us were in our homes working, living our lives, and kind of secluded in our own ways, not being able to go out to the office to work. And, we were covered up with masks and, home really became a sanctuary for many people. We were able to kind of insulate ourselves from the outside world, from everything that seemed to be going on. And then, so as a writer, I began thinking, well, what happens when home isn't so safe anymore? And really that idea of home came throughout the story of, Wylie staying in this old house, of, the other characters and their home lives and what that was like. And so it really became, like you said, a theme throughout the story. And as I think about it more and more, is it an idea, a place, all of the above? And when I think back to my own childhood, my childhood home, I still consider home, and I haven't lived there in over 35 years. And I also think of where my parents live now, the house that they were in just until recently, for about the last 17 years, moved there when I was an adult. That was a home to me too, because they were there. And I think of, my own home, and I think of my kids. And so, yeah, home can definitely be people, wherever they are. It is such a broad subject. It means so many different things to many people. Fortunately for me, home has always been a positive, warm, safe place. For some of the characters in my books, not so much, and for people out there in the world. And I think we're all in search of that safety net, the idea of home, and we're always looking for it.
Yeah, well said. I remember when I was living in another state and working somewhere, I always said to people, "Oh, I'm going home, for the Christmas holiday or whatever it is." And I had one of my supervisors come to me one day and said, "Why do you keep referring to that as home? You live here. This is your home." But in my mind, I was very upset by that. I really processed because, as you pointed out, for some people, not everybody, maybe that is a strong sense of security because that's where people you loved raised you, or you had good memories and experiences. But look at where the opposite is true.
Right.
So, very interesting.
I love that you brought that up, Kristen, that whole concept of home. And even with this book, because in this home, so much transpires. That's a very deep meaning to that whole word. Thank you for bringing that up. I want to talk about one character in your book. I don't want to give any names, but when this character was in danger, she retreated to her safe place, a spot by the windowsill with a book. And I do have to admit that it reminded me of your story as a child crawling into so I have two questions now. My first one is, she exited the real world and entered a pretend fantasy world where evil didn't exist. Also, some characters sustained abuse from their past, and they had post-traumatic amnesia to these hurtful events. Some blatantly just chose to forget. So 3 ways to escape past hurt. As the reader, I couldn't help but wonder if sometimes this refusal to face the truth is a safety. And I know it is, because maybe we can't deal with it. But when does this strategy slip into a dangerous realm, both for your characters and maybe even for us?
Yeah, that is great because, for my whole life, reading has been a wonderful escape. For the smallest of reasons and the biggest of reasons. I would climb into that toy box with my books because for me, with my hearing challenges, the outside world could be just kind of, crazy in some ways where, all this information is coming at you and it's hard to pull what's important from it. And school was exhausting. And, I came home to these great brothers and sisters and my mom and dad, but it was a very busy household. And that was my way to just kind of step away from the world and then get lost into these books. And as an adult, that continued. And I think about this often. When my son was 13, he was diagnosed with bone cancer and had to undergo, significant treatment for that, of course. And books became a retreat for him while he was undergoing treatment. While I was sitting in the hospital room with him, I mean, what 13-year-old boy wants their mom staring at him? So he'd close the curtain and, read his books or watch what he wanted to. And I would read on the other side of the curtain, or I would write. And that became, a wonderful escape for a few hours for me. And even recently, this really came to light. My dear father recently passed away, and I retreated to some books that were a comfort to me. And it's funny because one of them's a thriller and, kind of all murdery, but it was a book that I really enjoyed and I knew what was going to happen. I enjoyed the story and it kind of felt safe in that sense. Something was something I could expect and understand in that way during a very difficult time. So I think books do that for us and it's wonderful. Now, when does it cross the line of, total escapism? And I guess that happens when you don't face the world around you, is when, other parts of your life start to suffer. Maybe you're not working to pay the bills, or, the laundry gets out of hand or whatever, or relationships suffer. And that's when, that kind of escape and not facing in the truth, when you can't move forward in your life and come back out of the book or whatever else you do to kind of escape the world and deal head on with whatever grief or trauma or just, needing a little self-care, coming back out into the world to face those things. That's when it becomes a problem.
Mm-hmm. I like how that all unraveled in your story without saying any more, how people came to face past hurt and learned how to deal with it, or maybe not even deal with it, but to put it somewhere.
Right.
Or acknowledging that it was there. It's a very great thriller, but it's also a very deep, emotional book and something I think a lot of people will relate to. And let me just say a side note. Life gives us all sorts of difficulties. I am grateful that your hearing loss and difficulties led to you being a writer. So I love when I see something good come out of a hardship. Thank you for writing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think, for me, reading started out being very difficult for me because of my hearing loss. I got really far behind in school. I didn't like school, which was really disappointing because I was so excited to go. But when they discovered it and were able to make accommodations, I got my hearing aids. It's like a light went on, and reading became so important to me. And really, that's where, that discovery really, it took time, everything takes time and it's a journey, but the path led me to where I am now. And I'm very grateful for that. Wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah. And Heather, we're very sorry about the loss of your dad.
Thank
And,
you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I'd like to press in a little bit on what you were both just talking about, because there's so many different angles when you look at past harm and trauma and your current life and relationships. And some of your characters were struggling in their current relationships, even though that had not exactly anything to do with what happened to them in the past, but there was some kind of a dissonance there. They were not settled. They were not at peace. And I was wondering if you thought it was very important for us to, at some point in our lives, make peace with what has happened in the past so that we can move forward.
Yeah, I think that, ideally that is so important. We all know people and ourselves and different situations that we carry things with us. And most times people don't see what we carry because we carry it inside, and it gets very heavy. And it becomes heavier in certain situations. And so I think, it's kind of presumptuous to say, people need to move on and put things behind them, and so they can move forward in life, though there is some truth to that. But I think what even is equally as important is how people learn how to carry what they have. And I heard, and I don't know the exact context of it, it was about grief. Somebody had said, people don't get over grief, but they grow around it. And I think that is probably similar to when you carry, this stuff from your past and from circumstances that, if we don't try to work through it and try to understand it, things can become stagnant and you can miss out on so much. But if you learn to let it grow around you, or you try to work through it in some ways, then you can carry it and have relationships and be very happy, I think. Do we ever really lose that trauma, that grief? Probably not, but we can keep moving forward.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was very satisfying about your story, because there was kind of a closure in terms of the physical sense, but also in a metaphorical sense when we talk about justice. And so it really tied in so beautifully all of your themes. And I appreciate that. That was something that, as people, we learn to process some of these things from our past, sometimes by reading fiction and seeing other people, fictional lives or even real lives, process and work through these things. So well done.
Thank you.
Loved it so much. Now, I do have to admit, I am very good at figuring out mysteries, and I'll sit down with my husband 10 minutes into a movie. I'll say, here's what happened. He'll say, stop ruining it for me all the time. So I figured it out, but not right away. I'd say I was a good 75 to 80% through. So thank you. And I'm the different person, but I still loved every second of it. And can you give us an idea for our listeners? What's on your radar? What are you working on next?
Oh, yes. I'm so excited. My next thriller is coming out actually next March. So it's a little bit a ways away, but it's called Everyone is Watching. And it was really a lot of fun to write. So the premise is 5 strangers from across the United States are invited to take part in a reality show. And when they get there, they find out they were all brought there for completely different reasons. And secrets that were meant to stay hidden begin to come out. So yeah, Everyone is Watching next March.
That sounds fantastic, doesn't it,
does. Oh my gosh, yes.
We're going to look forward to that so very much. So listeners, listen, you've got to pick up this book by Heather Gudenkauf. It's called The Overnight Guest. Kristen and I love it. You're going to go on a thrill ride. Read it with the lights on. That's my advice. But maybe not. If you're brave, read it with the lights out. We got to have some lights on in order to see it. So we got it. And in the meantime, you're going to want to connect with Heather. You can find her on her website, heathergudenkauf.com. She's also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest. I saw you had a blog for a while. Are you still blogging?
I'm not like I should be. but I need to get back at it. But yeah, periodically I get back into there and share my thoughts.
Okay. And they can check out the old
Yeah.
blog posts until you get another one. And thank you so much for joining us on BOOKSTORM Podcast.
Thank you both so much. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Truly loved reading this book and being afraid. It's fun to be afraid sometimes. One thing that hit me, and I wondered what you thought about it, and we didn't have time to ask her everything. Discovering who the evil person was in the story was not easy. In the real life, can people hide their true selves? And can they hide it forever? Or do they reveal it to someone? I thought about that for a long time. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about this in the past where we say people eventually reveal themselves. And it comes about as a result of interactions every day. You're at a restaurant and how you treat the wait staff, things like that, where they don't think anyone is watching. I think that's where people really reveal themselves. And I don't know about you, but I think it really becomes extra important when you are deciding whether to marry someone or to have a long-term relationship with someone. You want to allow that time to elapse so that you see them in all these different situations, right? Because we think about the first 2 years as you're kind of in bliss and you're in this cloud, the lavender haze. And it's over time, more than 2 years, that you really start to see people for who they are. I don't know. What do you think?
I want to agree with you. I want to believe that even in the case of infamous real life psychopaths that we know have been mass murderers, and someone will say, I saw them at the gas station. They were so nice. They had such a sweet baby face. They seemed so nice. I want to believe that someone in their life caught a glimpse of who they really were. I don't want to believe that they were capable of 100% hiding it. Now, I'm talking about extreme evil here. We could even just talk about everyday evil, because we know nasty, evil people that walk among us, and they're not murderers and they're not psychopaths, but they're mean people. Can they hide it? I don't think so. I think, like you said, you see them in a stressful situation or something that's not going their way, and they don't have the strength to conceal it. And then didn't we once say for our young watchers and listeners, those are red flags that should not be ignored.
Oh my gosh, I agree. And we're so good at overlooking red flags, right? Because we fill in those blanks. We make excuses for people that we really love or are attracted to. And you can't do that because, that's where your life can go off course because you didn't heed those red flags. They're red flags for a reason. And I think that's why having good friends who care about you, people with good judgment around you is so important.
Mm-hmm. And listen to your parents, right? When they say, that's not the wise person to date or whatever, or your friend. So let me follow up with this one more question. How long do you think it takes to get to know someone?
Oh, I think after 2 years, that's a good amount of time to start seeing a real person. But up until that time, I really think you are, let's say it's a significant other. I think you're too enamored by the other things. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree. And it's so funny you should say that, because I really don't have an answer to that. But earlier today, I was with a group of younger women, 30-year-olds, late 20s, early 30s. And I asked them that question. They said the same that you said, 2 years.
Oh, interesting.
2 years is a long time. It's a long time.
Now, I'm going to ask you another time question, because there is another underlying theme in this book relating to justice and holding people accountable for the wrong that they do. But that took a very long time. And I wanted to ask you about that, because there's a lot of people who think, am I ever going to see this situation, this wrong thing made right? And this person in the book, at least, we're not going to say who, it was a long time.
And you know what? When they found out who it was, I could have jumped in there and killed him myself. Sounds terrible. You just wanted him dead. After you saw what he did, you just wanted justice for that person. So this is a tough question, Kristen. I mean, let's just talk about the real world. Let's just be honest. Justice is not always done. It's not always done. I want to believe, and I do believe, that what you sow, you reap. Some say karma. I think if you fill your life and everything around you with evil deeds and nasty comments and cruelty to people, what is going to grow up all around you? You're going to be surrounded by all kinds of garbage because you planted it. Versus if you're a kind person and you're helping people and you're giving compliments and you're trying to include and be kind to people, that's going to come back to you. So pure and total justice, though, for a criminal, I guess we have to find them first.
Absolutely. And again, this is where people who believe either in an afterlife or karma, you've got to believe that there is some equality or some leveling at some point where that accountability comes into play. But for now and on Earth, I guess we only have our justice system or we have vigilantes. And, the problem is my kids and I always talk about this with vigilantes. We can't mete out justice that way because we will have chaos everywhere. So we've got to kind of work within the system we have, which is not always just and sometimes gets it wrong and takes a very long time. And that's where that frustration comes in.
But would you say it's probably the best system in the world? It's better than nothing, and it's a pretty good system overall. And thank goodness we have that instead of nothing, because just for the record, Kristen and I are not endorsing any kind of vigilante acts here. Although,
no, that's the
sometimes
chaos.
It sounds good sometimes. But you know what you can do when you feel like you want to see some crazy stuff happen? Pick up a really good book of fiction, because you can live all sorts of crazy existences in fiction. You can be all kinds of people, and it's a lot of fun.
That's why we love superhero movies.
That's right. Yes, we do. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, BOOKSTORM Podcast, once again. Got to give a shout out to who, our talented sound engineer and producer, Mr. Mark Carey, working remotely now, still behind the scenes, still making us look and sound good. Hi, Mark. We miss you here with us every day. And I'm going to give you a couple storm predictions to pique your interest, because we are so excited. We've got David Baldacci, Simply Lies, Susan Meissner, Only the Beautiful, Chris Bojalian, paperback release of The Lioness, our friend Madeline Martin, The Keeper of Hidden Books, Bryn Turnbull, Paris Deception, Katie Quinn and Janie Chang, The Phoenix Crown, Ellie Banks, aka Maisie Yates, One Little Spark, Matthew Quirk, Inside Threat, Colleen Oakley, The Mostly True Story of Tanner and Louise, Kate White, Our Friend, Between Two Strangers, Nikki Ehrlich, The Measure, and Juan Gabriel Vasquez, Retrospective.
Oh my goodness, what a list. Listeners, we are so thankful for you listening to us and spreading the word. We ask that you continue to spread those links on socials and interact with us. It has been wonderful. We are very grateful and very humbled. We love having these kind of deep conversations. We cover so many different subjects, but that's the fun of being able to discuss and debate and talk about things that impact us on a real life level. So stay on the radar with us. You can visit us at bookstormpodcast.com. We are on Facebook, we're on Twitter, on Instagram, we're on TikTok, and you can check us out on YouTube. Just search for Bookstorm and Podcast, and you can see us and our wonderful authors there in person. Until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.